Alright, this is turn 1. So I'm going to use my starting Lemur Acolyte, which I get because this is summod, to summon a Lemur Centurion. My Pretender is just going to research for now, because while I could try to have her solo a throne, that's probably not going to work out very well. I'm going to hold off on making my profit for now so that I can blind expand with my starting army. The Lemur Centurions, as I'd mentioned in the Lemuria overview, have a Fear Aura and a Cold Aura, which allows them to do well against indies even on their own, and because they're both ethereal and have high protection, they're actually quite resilient. I'm going to use him in conjunction with my starting army, the idea being that these guys are going to rush forward and throw their javelins and potentially eat enemy attention, and the Lemur Centurion himself is going to follow in shortly behind them and use his Fear Aura to help rout the indies. So let's take a look at the enemy pretenders real quick. So you've got the Unspeakable One, the god of La Olm. So Olm is actually quite good against Lemuria early because they can mass up their S1 mages to cast Solar Rays, which is going to nuke 1 AoE of Undead every time they cast it. So I'll need to be careful with my mage positioning when fighting Olm because that's a very long-range spell with 100 precision, so it's most likely going to prefer to target whichever squares have the highest HP. As long as I stack 3 of my regular infantry ghosts per square, I should be okay, and as long as I keep the mages on their own. But he's still going to be able to deploy a huge amount of firepower to completely wipe out my ghosts if I go at him without a very strong strategy and a lot of indie crossbows. Burning Father, the god of Marignon. So Marignon is a fire-based nation, which means he also has some very strong early-game magic, which is going to be potentially devastating against me, namely fire elementals and flaming arrows. Because Marignon has their own national crossbows with a relatively low resource cost, they're definitely going to be massing those guys. And with flaming arrows, that's going to add a second instance of damage to each crossbow attack, which is magical, which means that every crossbow bolt that gets past the shield is for sure going to do damage to my ghosts, and is very likely going to kill them. But fire elementals are much worse, because they have very high base magic resistance, which means that they're likely to avoid damage from my ghosts altogether, and they're going to be hitting with an area of effect attack, which is going to be doing, again, magical damage, which can completely fry my ghosts. So if he deploys either of those two early mid-game spells against me, or worse, both, then he's definitely going to be able to beat me in a straight fight. Once he gets blood magic stuff out, he's going to be even better equipped to fight me because most of the blood stuff that Marignon is going to summon, namely devils and fiends of darkness, does actually have magic attacks. So again, it's going to be very difficult to fight him, and demons are of course immune to darkness. Fiends of Darkness actually get a benefit from fighting in it, and that's one of the things which I would normally want to deploy in order to reduce the accuracy of his crossbows and the attack and defense of his infantry, so that's going to do nothing against him. Once he gets out like blobs of flying demons, I'm basically going to need to use attrition tactics to wear those guys down, because I definitely won't be able to beat them in a straight fight. Mictlan actually takes a while to get magic that is dangerous for Lemuria. Mictlan's Sacreds tend to have low-length weapons, which means that my spectral infantry can actually repel them. So that's going to help with both keeping my spectral guys alive and dealing damage. Additionally, Mictlan in general is relatively weak to fatigue tactics if he takes a normal bless, which means that if I put up Rigor Mortis and have like a wall of ghosts and regenerating, and like a wall of replenishing skeletons and so on, then he's going to have a hard time. However, Mictlan does also get fire magic, so once again, if he builds a bunch of his fire mages, he can deploy similar tactics to what Marignon can do, except his will be flaming slingers, which actually fire even more often and are therefore even more dangerous to ghosts. And again, he can deploy fire elementals, which completely wreck my ghost stuff. His nature mages are a little bit less threatening. They don't really do a whole lot that's dangerous to ghosts aside from their S1 stuff, and they're very expensive for just S1 mages. The fact that they're flying means that they're mobile, so he can deploy them in force relatively easily. But I'm not super worried about those guys compared to just his blood stuff. And again, he does have blood magic, so he can deploy the same generic demons that Marignon can. However, Mictlan tends to prefer to spend its blood slaves on Tlahuelpuchis and Ocelotls, neither of which are particularly effective against ghosts compared to the magic attack Fiends of Darkness and Devils and so on. And again, my magic is actually relatively good against Mictlan because I'm using the type of spells which one would want to deploy against Mictlan, regardless of the fact that one is ghosts. Jomin has Rainbow Mages. He both has S2 access with his Astral Rainbow guys, and then he also has lots of mixed elemental magic from his Master Shigenjas. So he can similarly do a bunch of Flaming Arrows, or potentially Fire Elementals, but he's a little bit more random reliant for that. So he has to actually deploy the right, or get a little bit lucky with the right stuff in order to have effective magic against me. However, he can get up anti-magic, which can make his troops much more resistant to my attacks, which, by the way, everyone else here can too. And he also just, will potentially have fire magic, which is a little bit scary. And then his mixed elemental stuff also includes a variety of different ghost-killing tools, like Cleansing Water and so on, which come online a bit later. His national troops aren't particularly threatening, and Jomin tends to be weak early. So we'll have to wait and see what comes from that. L.A. Agartha is potentially strong against ghosts if he deploys his elemental mages, the Chthonian alchemists, en masse. If he instead relies upon his death mages, the Chthonian reanimators, that's a little bit less threatening, because the D2 magic, while he can cast Dust to Dust, isn't super scary. Like, that's just a D1 spell, essentially. It doesn't have a scaling AoE, and Skelly Spam is actually fairly weak against Lemuria, because the skeletons have very low magic resistance, so my ghosts can actually cut their way through them, and then, because the mages aren't casting spells which actually kill the ghosts, they can potentially beat Agartha's armies that way. If he does go for the Chthonian alchemist-oriented strat like I prefer for Agartha, though, he can also definitely be threatening early. Abyssia is mostly a blood nation in LA, but they also still have widespread fire magic, so again, they can deploy effective magic against me if they actually go with a mage-heavy route. His troops have low magic resistance, the Warbred, which is LA Abyssia's better but more expensive troops. But they do have very high protection, which means that even though my troops are likely to land their attacks through the magic resistance, they also are fairly unlikely to deal damage just based on the huge amount of protection that the Warbreds have. So that can also potentially be difficult. And then finally we have Atlantis, which is actually by far the hardest matchup here. So Atlantean infantry don't have particularly amazing magic resistance, but they do have very high protection, which scales based on temperature scales. And because I'm a cold-preferring nation, given that Lemuria has a bunch of cold auras, I took cold 3, which means that his troops are going to have very high protection in my dominion. More importantly, though, all of his land troops have magic weapons, which means that they're going to be just carving right through my front line. Atlantis is one of the hardest nations for Lemuria to fight early, and they can also defend themselves against Lemuria very easily just by spreading out a few of their magic damage weapon troops throughout all of their provinces. So definitely a lot of difficult nations for Lemuria to fight, but then again, Lemuria is not particularly strong, so that's not too surprising. And that's turn 1. This is turn 2. I managed to expand successfully. I did go up against a priest, though, which means that this was actually a dangerous province, because while my guys do have relatively good MR, a priest can always get lucky, and the fact that they're doing AoE attacks with their banishment means that it's just going to be hitting a wide area, so it has a very high potential to do damage to my guys. So in the Javelin versus Javelin thing, my guys actually do just fine. Because they have shields, they can actually resist ranged attacks somewhat well. Here you can see they're kind of getting cut up, and you can also kind of see the weakness that comes with having spectral weapons. However, this guy's Fear Aura manages to rout this first heavy infantry squad, and is causing morale checks against these light infantry even while they are fighting my guys. The fact that his Fear Aura is also reducing the enemy morale means that when they are taking hits like they are now, they're more likely to fail a morale check and actually run away. And here they do rout, and the crossbowmen are going to rout shortly thereafter. So I do take some losses there, partially from the banishment spam, partially just from my guys being in melee, but they also do manage to win the fight. So now that I can see what surrounds me, I'm glad I didn't try to go for this, since that would have just given my pretender some afflictions for no reason. When my Deathly Dominion spreads over it, it's going to take out the non-undead stuff, just because they're going to starve to death when the population goes down, but because most of the throne's defenders are undead, they're going to be unaffected. I'm going to go try to take on this lizard shaman province. I'm going to be doing a similar tactic, relying on the fear aura from my Centurion to try to rout the lizards. This is an extremely valuable province if I can take it, because it's going to allow me to actually recruit mages, which normally Lemuria can't do at all. My gold isn't being spent on anything because I don't really have, I don't really have anything to recruit. But here I managed to find, in my very first province, 7 resource crossbowmen. So I'm actually going to be spamming these guys out because they're going to be able to help in expansion and in an early war, because they can actually do some serious damage from behind the front lines of my spectral skeletons. So non-magic resistance and negated damage is always valuable, and the fact that these guys are crossbowmen, which any nation likes, is makes them definitely worth massing. And I'm going to revive another Lemur Centurion in order to continue bolstering my expansion. This is turn 3 if I equip my heavy crossbow, and my first expansion ends in disaster. My Lemur Centurion gets killed. So that's no good, because this is actually a summoned commander, and I think I just messed up with the positioning on him. So I have these guys set to fire, and this guy's running up forward. And he actually gets ahead of my guys because, you know, they're all firing. And then, yeah, so these guys all have 2 attacks, and at size 3 there's going to be 3 of them per square. So that means that we've got 6 attacks per square, and they do manage to land through the ethereal. And they're also fairly high strength, with slightly above average strength and with a very high damage weapon. So they tear that Lemur Centurion apart and subsequently rout my undead. So that was basically just a positioning error. I need to actually get my ghost to be the first in when fighting lizard warriors. And even then, it was a little bit iffy given the small size of that expansion party, because I do need several rounds of combat in order to ensure that those lizard warriors rout. Here I don't have any problems, though. This is a much easier province to take, and I also have more ghosts going into it, and I have my guys set a little bit further back. I always put the dispossessed spirits that free spawn in my provinces up first, just because they can draw some hits, and given that my combat strategy is relying on the fear aura routing the indies rather than my ghosts doing the actual killing, it's helpful just to have that guy in the front taking hits over my more valuable guys. Here, you can see that I've got my first 2 Deadlands going, so my death income is a little bit higher, and I'm trying again to hit this lizard province. This time I've got him holding a little bit so that these guys are ensured to get in first, and I also get a spectral standard. So this is a free spawn guy who has fear, so they're very valuable because fear auras stack. Here we're still just building up these crossbowmen. I'm going to be spending all of my resources here on crossbowmen so I can get as many of these as I can while I can. And I'm continuing to revive Centurions so that I can continue sending out expansion parties. Good luck and so on is going to then keep expanding north and take on this province. Wastes are actually more valuable for Lemuria than normal provinces are, because Lemuria is totally reliant on gems instead of income. However, other people prefer wastes less than other provinces, so I can actually safely take them later, depending on where the other players started. This is turn 4, and my fixed formation is successful at taking on the Lizard Warriors, but I do lose the standard in the process, which kinda sucks. Having my Centurion on hold an attack ensures that these guys are going to be running up first, which essentially means that I'm playing it safe. However, the standard, just by sheer luck, is in the front squad, so he is going to be part of the brunt of the assault, and he even gets killed in the first wave, so no fear aura from him. However, my Centurion is running up even now, and my guys are actually able to do some damage to these lizard guys. While their morale, or their magic resistance, is slightly above average, their morale isn't all that great, so given that they're taking some damage and are now facing a fear aura, they're likely to rout relatively quickly. But yeah, my ghosts actually managed to do some killing. They get lucky on their MR check rolls, and yeah, we get rid of those lizards. And then here, I similarly experience success. I go up against another priest, which again means that this province was slightly more dangerous, but it didn't end up posing any problems. Interestingly, here you see that my squad split. My Lemur Centurion is going off solo, and he actually has heroic quickness, so that means that he's going to be attacking more frequently, and given that he has no encumbrance, this is actually really strong. I might end up thugging this guy later. Heroic quickness is the only quickness ability that stacks with quickness from items, So yeah, it's one of the better heroic abilities to get on anyone who you actually want fighting in melee. They do end up chasing this squad out a little bit far, and then they also get the indies stuck against them. This would be good if it were a player army, because it ensures that these guys all die, but since indies die when they're out anyways, it's not super significant. So here I get a toad tribe, which is awesome. That gives me a free mage, and here I get a gold event, which is also awesome, because I normally have trouble getting gold. I definitely need to build a lab and a temple here in order to recruit these lizard shamans, so he's starting with the lab now. And then I'm considering actually profiting this guy just so that he can do, so that he can build the lab or the temple for me, or I might end up just moving this guy over. Right now, though, I'm still spending too many death gems on getting expansion guys, which means that I don't have leftover death gems to recruit actual mages, which is a little bit difficult. Nevertheless, I'm going to give all the toad guys to the Lemur Centurion, and he's still set to be a little bit more conservative. I'm using these guys as flankers set to attack archers, the idea being that they're going to run, or hopefully can run around the enemy army and hit the archer/commander squad, while my ghostly troops can just bear the brunt of the attack. I've got deadlands here already as well, because you end up with your first several deadland sites come very quickly. Later on, I'm going to need to have dominion and such in my provinces, and also have the population be much lower in order to actually get the deadlands. I'm still not recruiting anything, but given my amount of gold, I'm able to continue spamming out these crossbowmen, and I'm building a commander here so that I can build my first fort, which I'm soon going to need to follow up with a temple, of course. I'm going to continue building free spawn-based parties, and yeah, now I'm going to go for this waste province, which actually looks relatively easy. This is turn 5, and I've actually done some research and enchantment with my pretender. I take on this province very easily. Heavy cavalry, while they are threatening against most nations due to their high damage attack, don't have anything special against ethereal units, which means that they're no more likely to cause damage to my guys than anyone else. Here I actually get a little bit unlucky with my Lemur Centurion getting basically stuck in all on his own, and he manages to pick up some afflictions in the process. However, his fear aura and the fact that there's only 2 heavy cavalry in that squad there means that all of the indies actually rout very quickly. So that's actually pretty lucky, given that this guy was in a bad position and could have died. Here in the Verdant Steppe, I lose a bunch of my ghosts while expanding, but otherwise expand okay. And the ghosts themselves aren't super important. I'm going to be getting more ghosts than I can even use eventually. But for now, they seem to be expanding just fine. The fact that their attacks have been changed to difficult to negate with magic resistance from regular magic resistance negate means that they do notably more damage. So while I still am relying on the fear aura to cause routes, they are actually doing more damage here than they would in vanilla, which definitely helps with actually clearing out these indies, in spite of the fact that I have fewer Centurions to do the expansion. And yeah, eventually we force a rout there. Here I lose a bunch of those Toad Tribe Shamans, which I had been setting to flank, but that's okay because I'm paying upkeep on these guys, and they're not very good. So I'm definitely using them to assist in my expansion while I can, but I'm not really, like, super keen on keeping these guys around long term. Oh, so my Disturbed Spirits cause paralysis instead of causing damage, so you can see that this guy here got paralyzed. So a paralyzed unit has 0 attack and 0 defense, they can't move at all, and if you cause additional paralysis to an already paralyzed unit, then they actually take damage as well. So this isn't super relevant at first, but eventually Lemur is going to just have absolute masses of Disturbed Spirits, because they're your free spawn from unforted provinces, and eventually those guys are going to actually be very useful. So here, while my ghosts are actually engaging the infantry, my Toad Tribe succeeds in getting past them and getting to the Archer Squad, exactly like what I wanted. And then here they're hitting the commanders. Unfortunately, they kind of suck. Like, they're fighting the archers, and they actually lost to the archers, basically, in melee combat. So they actually ran away, but luckily they caused enough damage to cause the Archer Squad to lose enough of its HP that when my ghosts and fear aura routed the regular infantry, the archers were routed as well. So I lose most of my 12 Toad Tribe warriors, but I'm definitely not really missing them. And here I get additional gold, which is awesome. I always like having more gold. And I'm doing the same thing here, just going to have these guys run around and hit the archers. That's going to prevent the archers from shooting at my ghosts. I'm moving this guy over here to build a temple, so that I can start recruiting lizard shamans, and I'm having my indie commander build a fortress while continuing to build these indie crossbows. And my Centurion is going to lead the expansion party down here. That's the new guy who I got from my summoning. I'm going to recruit my second mage now. I both have the extra gems for it, and I need this guy to build the temple, so time to start summoning 2 Centurions per turn. And meanwhile, this guy who was successful is going to continue expanding down here, and these guys are going to continue expanding down over here. So, as you can see, just from my free spawn and summoning a single Centurion per turn, my expansion thus far has been excellent. Vanilla Lemuria can expand even harder by summoning additional Lemur Centurions, which means that you can essentially create multiple expansion parties every turn. I'm not quite at that level, but I am doing very well for myself. And that's the turn.